Welcome to the KAPOW radio show and to Why This Verse is Awesome with your host, Paul KAPOW. Each episode presents specific Bible verses which are examined to unleash the reasons why those verses are so awesome. Join me in surveying and exploring the characteristics that make those verses so meaningful in our lives. Well, today's scripture, the verses that are so awesome to us are going to be in Genesis chapter 2, verses 5 through 8. Let me read them for you. And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come again to you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and they went both of them together. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father and said, My father. And he said, Here am I, my son. And he said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. Now, the background of this story, very shortly, is that God was proving Abraham's faith and fear, loyalty, and worship to him. In this instance, in this proving ground, he had asked Abraham to sacrifice his only son to him. And we all know this story, how the angel of the Lord stopped that, and Abraham's faith had been increased. So we're going to talk about what makes these particular verses so awesome to us. And I'm happy today because I have Miss KAPOW in the studio with Paul KAPOW. And she's going to tell you why these verses are awesome to her.
Well, when I was reading, the verse 5 really stood out to me, where it says, And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and come again to you. And while he said that, it dawned on me that God, that Abraham had such a special relationship with God. He'd been through many other testings with God where he'd ask God questions and whatnot. But here, God is asking him to sacrifice his only begotten son, one that he waited for a very long time. So he was very special to Abraham. But here, Abraham doesn't argue with the Lord at all. He just does what God tells him to do. But he also knew in his heart that God would not take his only son from him. I believe that. I believe because Abraham knew God, and that God himself would offer or provide a sacrifice for them. And that's why Abraham was able to tell the men, and we will come back. After we worship, we will come back to you. So that took a step of faith in God's character. So that's what verse 5 meant to me.
That's awesome. Now for me, what makes these verses so awesome is when we go down to verse 7, and Isaac spake unto Abraham his father and said, My father. Abraham answers him, Yeah. And he says, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Because even Isaac knew, hey, there's something else is missing here. Something has to be provided. And in verse 8, Abraham says, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. To me, that's what makes it so awesome. Here's the key for Paul KAPOW. God will supply to himself that which is needed for us to properly serve, to worship, and to fear him. Now, we do not supply anything towards God's reconciliation with us. That's what makes this so awesome. It kind of goes with the scripture in Micah that I read a few days ago about what God requires of us. And it isn't all this work. It isn't our money. It isn't our religion, but it was true justice and mercy. And here we have this key in the scripture saying, I will supply that very thing that you need to meet my requirement. That's why it's so awesome. And so we find later on that in fact, God did provide that which was required for our reconciliation in Messiah. So this is another awesome aspect of these verses, is because they're so prophetic. Now, we hardly honor God when we hope for nothing from him except what our senses can perceive. So if we can see it, we go, I know God can do this or God can do this and I can see it. But we show him the highest honor when in our great perplexity, when you can't figure out what is going on and you've reached that level of, I don't know what to do, where else to go with this, that we nevertheless in that situation, that we entirely submit to his will. Now here's Abraham in this situation. And he's not trying to figure out, how am I going to get out of this? How am I going to plead? How am I going to manipulate God? Change his mind? He just submits because he says, God will provide himself the sacrifice. And finally, Abraham contented himself by replying to Isaac, my son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. Now, it's been supposed that the design of this extraordinary transaction was to show him by action instead of words the way in which all the families of the earth should be blessed, and that in his answer to Isaac, he anticipated some substitution. But I think these verses are prophetic, and I don't think Abraham understood that this was going to be applied to Messiah or anything like that. It's just the way God works. And nothing's by accident or coincidence. And here's this incredible story and this incredible faith, like Miss KAPOW said, in action right before our eyes. And that is why I find those verses awesome. And how about you, Miss KAPOW?
I ditto that.
And you find it awesome. All right. Thank you for joining us today on Why This Verse is Awesome. And we'll talk to you next week.
Ciao, babies.
Recently, spiritual attacks on innocent people have increased considerably. This is partly due to society's transformation into a satanic cult. Most people are clueless or hopeless in combating this spiritual mayhem. We wish to offer 2 good books to overcome these attacks. First, Demons in My Marriage Bed, a true story of spiritual warfare, offers one of the most effective training systems in combating spiritual darkness in order to gain personal freedom. Second, Eyes to See Unseen Enemies teaches how to see the hidden dangers which are all around us, even in places we would least expect them. Both books can be purchased on Amazon.com as a paperback or ebook. It is our desire that you will take advantage of these opportunities to increase your effectiveness in spiritual warfare and learn how to fight back instead of being a victim. We'll see you on the battlefield.